Hi everybody, and thank you for joining me on another edition of Glen's Retro Show. Today we're going to do part 2 of my Raspberry Pi builds using the Basic Fun Pac-Man and Space Invaders. If you haven't seen part 1, you probably want to go back to my links down below and check out the first part where we talk about getting the parts and setting up the display. In this episode, we're going to talk about how we're going to interface the joystick and button controls into the Raspberry Pi. Setting up a USB sound unit, because the Raspberry Pi Zero and Raspberry Pi Zero W don't easily have sound capabilities outside of the HDMI port, but you can do it. And we're also going to talk about battery and charging circuits and how to actually close the machine up. In the next episode, we're going to talk about how to set up the software end of it. But let's get started. Let's take a look at how we're going to complete the project hardware-wise. So let's get started. Let's go. Okay, so when you take apart your Space Invaders or Pac-Man, in this case it is the Pac-Man, this is what you'll end up with. You have your display, your speaker, little on-off quick connect button used for the demo mode, and then you have your main controller and your secondary controller. And to be quite honest, these are really not too bad at all. The silicone pads work fairly well. They're fairly responsive, especially for the price point of like $9. They originally were $19. But they went down to 9 fairly quickly, and they're still making money on these things. So for what they are, they work pretty well. And you can see on the front of them, everything's written in English and pre-marked, which made it really easy to make the conversion. Now the VCC here are going to be our ground, and the start is actually going to be this one here. That's our first fire button. At least that's what I set up on mine. And then your down, left, right, up, and fire button over here, which is the fire button number 2. And the on-off button will now become our insert quarter, and sound will be our start button. And then COM is the ground for the secondary board. So it's pretty nicely done. The board itself is not the highest quality, so be very careful with your soldering iron. And I have a very fine tipped soldering iron, but this is temperature controlled. I can set the temperature on here, and you don't want to set it too high, because these particular boards will burn very easy and damage the traces very easy. Use a lower heat, just enough to get that solder melted. And if you use the flux on there, which I highly recommend you use flux in any of this, put flux down first to help get the solder off. If you have a solder wick, the solder wick will absorb the solder into the wick and get the contacts nice and clean. That's probably the best way to do it. Or you could just heat the solder, pull out the wires, and heat the solder again and put the new wires in there. But again, always use flux. That'll help the solder flow easier and keep them on the pins and not damage and burn your board. You can see even with doing so, these guys got a little, they're okay. I mean, the connectors are fine, but they did burn a little bit. But once you put some flux on there and fresh solder, they were fine. And the silicones, again, they're really pretty good. I have no problems with any of these getting response. They're a little bit on the mushy side, but again, for what it is, it's not bad. The bigger issue is the board itself. It's delicate. Don't flex it too much. Don't use too much heat. They'll break and damage fairly easily. But if you only take a little care, just a little care, they'll be okay. Here's our secondary board here, our 2 buttons. Here's our COM, which is our ground, and then button 1 and button 2. Here's another shot of them all together. Again, you can't get any easier than this. Everything's marked. You don't have to tone anything out. You know exactly where everything's going to be, and that's excellent. Here's the back end. I believe that's in Chinese, telling you the same thing on the other side. That's in English. But even the buttons, they're locked in nice. You can pull them out if you need to get in there, but they're not going to fall off. A lot of these, you open them up, the silicone just kind of fall out. They're even held in place. So even that's kind of nice. So this part of it was kind of a pleasure to work on. Now these wires, I made 2. I made one here for the main control panel and one for the secondary control panel. And again, I made them too long. They're about 10 inches. But again, at the time I was prototyping, seeing how I wanted it to kind of flow in the unit. But you could probably get away with just 5 inches, half that length. On both of these. And again, it's just an old IDE cable. Used an X-Acto knife just to separate the wires. And on each of them, on one side, you can see here, I marked with a Sharpie, so I know which is going to be my ground wire, or my first wire in any case. And I'll know after that where each wire is going to come from. It'll just save you some time later on down the road. And you can see, I used my helping hands again. Didn't get a picture of it there, but I did use my helping hands. Hold the board, heat the solder, put a little flux on it, heat that solder, push the wires in, let it cool, hold them in place. It only took a few minutes to do. See, they're all in there really nice. And just check on all of them. You're going to make sure no one has any bridging, because it'll short the wires. It won't damage anything. It just one control won't work, or control will be stuck on in any case. So just make sure there's no bridging in there. And again, all these silicones are held in nice and they work really well. This one here, you got to be careful when you do heat it. The plastic on these will melt easily. So I did it quick, but you see the wire pushed in further because some of the plastic had melted. Not a big deal. Just snip that off and it'll be just fine. And again, take more care here. Did the same thing. The diagram will be up in 1 second, but I put some flux down on all the pins I needed to put it down on, and then put solder on there first, let it cool. Then I took my wire, found the one I had to go to, heat it again, and put the wire through. But you have to be much more careful now because you have obviously more wires in here. Now again, if the soldering iron does hit these, there are copper wires. It's not going to ruin the wire, but it will ruin the insulation. So you're going to have to go over it with liquid electrical tape or something. If you do happen to hit the wires, it's better just take a little time and care and not nick your wires. And this is what you'll end up with. Again, none of these are going to work yet because the next video will be how to configure the GPIOs to accept the display and the joysticks here. But all your wires should be good. You could take a continuity test if you wanted to test it to make sure your wires are going through. But if you follow my diagram, you did a good job with the soldering iron, they're all going to work just fine. Again, you can see how long these wires are. They didn't need to be this long. Again, it's fine, but when you go to put it in the unit, the more wires, it's just more of a mess to have to deal with to get them in. So if you can use a little bit less wire, do so. So here's the wiring diagram. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Number 9 is the ground. So you COM here in VC's ground. I put them into one GPIO pin. Now you can go to any ground you want. It's just the way I did it. I put them both into one. But you can see once again, everything's color coded and numbered. So GPIO pin 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is blue. That goes over to your right. Just follow all these wires and you'll be fine. Now I'm going to the front here obviously, but you want to go in from the back end so the wires are not in the way when you go to close the unit. But just if you need to, pause the video right here, take a screenshot, and follow this diagram, and you'll have no problems with any of your controls. They'll work up fine. Now again, after the display is installed and this control is installed, you still have some GPIOs left. So you could add additional buttons like on the back. If you want to have a third or fourth button back there, you can do that. Again, for these initial builds, that wasn't my plan. It's not what I wanted to do. So for right now, this is how it's all set up. And again, just another shot. None of these are going to work yet, but they're all set to be put inside the unit. And you can. As long as you soldered well and the wires are good, there's no reason why you can't put them all in now. And just basically put in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws and 2 screws here, and I'll mount them in place, and your display will sit on top. And in the next video, when you install the software, you could even test it at this point and make sure everything's working for you. Start trying to put everything in the unit, which is probably something you do want to do just to make sure everything's working the way it's expected. And here's just, again, a closer shot. And this is obviously a picture before I had done any cutting and anything else here. This was my first prototype. I'm working on this probably since November when these Basic Funs first came out. It took a while to get parts, took a while to figure out how everything was going to go. So we have some additional pictures here. And you can see how big the display was. If you didn't cut it, it would have been in the way of a lot of things. But you can see the control board fits in here. And I have, obviously, as you can see, more cable than I needed. This Raspberry Pi is going to sit right down here. So they have way too much wire for what I was using it for. So it became a little bit of hassle closing it. So if you want to make it shorter, it'll probably save you some time trying to fit those cables and get them out of the way. And the Space Invaders will be the same deal. Now, once you put it in place, you can fire up your Pi. All your buttons should then work. And at this point, you can either see it on the internal display if you install that part of the tutorial in my next video, or it'll be playing on your big screen, but the joystick and all the buttons would work here as they should. Again, just another test, firing it up right now on an external display, and the controls worked exactly as expected. This joystick here and this board is for another project for another day. Has nothing to do with this project here. And again, just trying to figure out how I'm going to put everything in. These wires were a lot longer. I probably should have even maybe cut them and redid them, but I did not. But again, shorter the better. Another shot of all the wires, and there's going to be quite a few. This is my display, and the joystick buttons are all coming up in the other direction. And now it's just trying to figure out how you're going to put everything in. That actually takes more time than anything else. It's trying to figure out how things are going to sit inside your unit. Again, when the joysticks are all done, display is done, if you want to have that, that's it. You could technically shove this all in there, just run the power jack out the back, and you can start playing and leave it as it is. But you wouldn't have the ability to run off a battery. You wouldn't have easy access to any of the controls. But technically, you could just glue that in place right now, and you'd be done. Okay, the next thing we're going to get working on is sound, some USB ports, and some Wi-Fi. Now, if you're using a Raspberry Pi Zero W, this might be a little bit easier. You won't have to go down this route unless you want extra USB ports. But with having a built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and having one USB port to maybe plug in a keyboard of some kind, that's probably all you're going to need. But since I had just Raspberry Pi Zeros, or maybe that's all you can pick up at the time, sometimes, you know, the Zeros and Ws are kind of hard to come by, unlike the 2 and the 3. So I had this little 4-port USB hub sitting around. I took the case off. It was small anyway, but you can see here we got 4 USB ports, a way to power it. Now I end up powering my Pi through the 1000C from Adafruit. So to make it fit in this unit, I had to lop this off, and I'm going to take one connector off and solder the USB sound directly on it, but we'll get to that in a minute. So you can see here I have a little Bluetooth dongle for my keyboard and mouse, and a little Netgear Wi-Fi that I'm going to plug it into that little hub. So you can see this is what it looks like here. Again, it's a really small hub. The cheap is like a $2 4-port USB hub. You can probably find them anywhere. Again, it just depends on how you want to try and fit it into the unit. I have these lying around, so that's what I'm using. So you can see here on the board the 4 wires needed for USB. The red is going to be your power. The white and green are your data transmitting, and then the black is your ground. Then we have 4 ports. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this particular header off of here, and I'm going to solder the USB sound directly onto it. And then these 3 ports are free. One will be for the USB dongle for the keyboard and mouse. The other will be for Wi-Fi, and there'll still technically be one available for maybe if I need to take a flash drive to copy more ROMs over, if I wanted to do that. So here's basically how I set it up. This is the bottom of the Raspberry Pi Zero. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. This is again my first prototype, and actually I had this done before I had gotten the Adafruit 1000. At this point in the build, I was actually still maybe going to do a battery power pack, but you see I changed my mind here. So when I initially did it, on the bottom of the Pi Zero, there was a header here for power. The positive one, it's hard to read here, but I have it in the documentation I'll put down later. But the positive is on this pad on the bottom, and your ground's on this pad. So I'm actually powering the USB ports with it, and I'm also powering the Pi itself. That's this wire here. This wire is coming from the Adafruit. So when this is powering, it's supplying power to the Pi through these 2 pads, which also supplies power to the USB port and all these devices. So I'm going to zoom into that again. So the red and black wire from the USB hub is coming in here, and then over here is the white and the green, which is the send and receive data on the USB header. So when you connect it this way, do not use the header on the Pi. I don't know if it'll cause a problem, but since I'm tapping into it this way and running a hub off of in this direction, that's not going to be used. And actually, when you see towards the end how I have it built, you cannot use the power jack or the USB jack on the Pi Zero. It's kind of blocked by the case, but you'll still be able to get to the HDMI out, which is what you want. So again, use a little hot glue here just to make sure the wires stay in place. But power's coming down to here, so all these guys are now powered, and their data is going to the USB headers on the Pi Zero. And right now you can see here I have, this is my I think that's my Wi-Fi. This is my Wi-Fi here, and this is my keyboard and mouse. And I'm going to be pulling this off here so I can solder the USB directly onto it. And since I have it over here, you can see here's the battery pack right here. It's just a generic lithium-ion or lithium polymer battery pack. Positive and negative is coming into here to this connector that supplies power to this circuit, and also it gets power from the outside. This orange yellow light here is saying it's charging the battery. So right now it is powered on. You can see the light here is for power. So if I was to pull the AC off, it automatically switches to the battery. So it acts almost like a battery backup for the unit as well. And then any point in time, you plug it in and charge your battery. So for the $19, it's small, it does everything you need, and you can supply 2 other wires off of here for a switch. And when that switch is open, not closed, when it's open, it'll supply power. When it closes, it turns off power. I know it's backwards, but that's how it works. And there's other things you can do with it too. There's a lot of different headers on here for other things. So here's just another little close-up here. I believe I think it's PP1 is your hot, your 5 volts coming in and going back out, because I'm doing both. I'm coming in on this gray wire and going back out to the USB port. And then PP6 is your ground. And then these 2 over here, I can't make out what they are right now, but I'll document that a little bit later, which ones they are. And again, just some hot glue. Again, when you put flux down, this will hold on really well, but the wires are so thin, too much flexing on them will just make them snap. So I'm just trying to avoid that by putting some hot glue on there. And just back real quick, I put this cable in here just to make sure I didn't short anything. You should put some this special tape. It's called, I'll put it down, it's like Teflon tape or something like that. But it's a special heat resistant tape that's non-conductive, and you can put it down and make sure that the pads are protected and nothing can short out. And I'll put that down into the description as well. So that was here just right now, just to make sure when I powered it, it didn't hit anything and short anything out. And just another photograph of the USB here. And here it is right now. I got the USB dongle plugged in, and this thing lights up really bright. You might want to take that off. I left mine on. It kind of glows kind of nice through the shell. But if you don't want that, just take the LED off and that'll stop. The headphone jack is here. There is a microphone jack. I actually just snip off the end. So when it goes in the unit, the headphone jack can go out, but the microphone jack is flush. It just helps to make a good seal when you put it in. And you can see here, I put some hot glue here because one actually popped off just in moving it around. So I resided it back on and put some glue for strain relief on there. So when you open up this here, and this cracks off pretty easy, just put a little screwdriver in here. These 2 halves just pop right off. It's not held on in any difficult way, neither is this. A little screwdriver in this spot right here, and these covers will pop right off. So I popped this one off over here to expose this. So you can see your power, your 2 data lines, and your ground. And I'm basically using my soldering iron, just touch each one of these. These wires came right off, no problem. And I put it this way just to see how it would go into the connector. So if I was to take this, it would plug directly in here. So now I know that the red's going to go here, the white's going to go here, the green's going to go here, and the black's going to go here. So all I did was I snipped off the old connector and desoldered it, and that came right off. And then I desoldered this, and I'm going to solder all these onto here. Now, in my particular hub right here, this is the 5 volts coming in anyway, so I don't have to worry about if this touched. But the rest of these, you want to make sure when you solder them that none of them are touching and shorting out. And there you go. So put a little flux down, put a drop of solder, heat that up again, and they'll solder and stick right in place. And again, I take some hot glue over here just to make sure that they do not come off or get strained or pulled in any way. Next thing I'm going to do is my PAM. Again, there's 2 kinds of this. I got the one with the potentiometer, so I can adjust the volume after the fact. You can get the smaller one, which is just basically this part up top, and you can adjust the volume within RetroPie. But I like having the option of just going really quickly and adjusting the volume. And it's really relatively simple. You have your 5 volts come in here, your negative here. So you're going to power this any way you can. You can get it from the Pi. The GPIO header has a 5 volts in the ground. The Adafruit has a 5 volt in the ground. And also the bottom of the Raspberry Pi is also 5 volts in ground from down there. And in this particular unit, I did pull the power from down there. And then you have your inputs. You have your ground, your left and your right channel. Now what I do is, since I'm using only a mono speaker, I already got one speaker, I bring the left and the right into my left. You can do it to the right, I suppose, but I brought them to the left. And then when I come out, this is my left speaker here, positive and negative out. Now if you do have two speakers, you want to do stereo, left, right, ground, and then you have speaker 1 for left, speaker 2 for right. Very easy to do. And it looks just like this. So here's the original speaker from the Basic Fun, the yellow wire. I simply put into the left channel. And initially, you can see I did here, I just put all three in different spots and power. But I ended up moving the right over to the left, so I had both channels. Again, most of the games I find will pump through the left channel anyway if it's mono, and not do anything to the right. But there's no reason why you can't do that. So I had the ground, left and right channel going into the one. You could do this, again, if you have two speakers, add a secondary speaker, and you'll have stereo if the game supports stereo. If not, you're going to get mono anyway. And here's just a diagram what we just talked about the PAM, showing you your left and right inputs, and the ground wire as well. The capacitors, the volume control over here, and it's also got an off switch. So if you turn it all the way down, it will turn off and click, and it'll give you an off indicator. Your power is coming in here, and it's going to be 5 volts you need. You don't want to go over 5 volts. If you go over 5 volts, 6 volts, it's gonna pop it. It'll fry. So you want 5 volts. Your output channels, and this is just a PAM 8403 chip, which is our little amplifier. So here is the other end of the sound card. See, I didn't take off the connector here yet, but again, the wires come in here. I laid down a little hot glue because the casing would have given you the strain relief. But since I took that off, put a little hot glue down here. Now, a lot of people will take both of these off and just solder right down onto it. I soldered onto here for my left, which is this one here. So soldered onto this one, and then this pad is here, soldered onto this one. So it's my left and right channels. This one here would have been the ground. And then I simply shaved this off here because I'm not using a microphone, but it gave me a nice flat spot to adhesive it down with the hot glue. And that's really it. Now the reason I did it this way, if the PAM is turned on, you click it and you bring up the volume, you have sound. But if you plug in headphones, you'll get headphones as well as the audio out. In case you want to maybe pump external speakers on, you could do that. It just gives you an option. And of course, if you turn the volume all the way down and you click it off, you'll only have audio coming out of the headphones. It's just the way I set mine up. And here's basically what it's going to look like. You have your speaker coming in here, your power, and then this comes audio out into here, the left and right channels here. Now I didn't hook up the ground. Initially I did hook up the ground to it, but when I did, I had a lot of noise, a lot of interference. And that's probably because this is already grounded. I'm already getting ground from here on the power circuit. So when I grounded it here, I had a lot of feedback. I popped it off. It's a lot cleaner. You still hear a little noise. Just the Raspberry Pis are just noisy to begin with. But with that grounded over here, it sounded actually horrible. Once I popped that off, it sounded pretty damn good. And again, it's not a very powerful speaker, so I couldn't expect to get high fidelity out of it. But I could always, if I wanted to, change the speaker with something higher quality. But again, I try and use everything stock as I can. And just another close-up shot of the power circuit itself. You can see here, you couldn't put a USB header on here, but I simply soldered right onto the pins. This just means that the unit is on and powered. This means it's charging the battery at a certain time. And you could pull ground from over here directly to the battery. You can bring another battery in instead of going through this connector. You can pump your battery on this side if you want to hardwire it. These two right here is where you're going to put on your power switch. So you would solder a single pole switch onto here, and when you throw it so that it's open, it'll turn on. When it closes, it turns off. I know it's kind of backwards, but that's how the circuit works. And then you can also pull 5 volts and ground from here as well. So it's a nice little circuit. 20 bucks, it's worth, I think it's worth it for what it does. Okay, we're coming down to the home stretch, but this is probably the hardest part of the entire build, and that's getting everything actually in the unit in a nice way. I mean, we've already taken our unit, we've opened our unit, we've taken all the parts out of the unit, we've set up our display, we've set up our joysticks, we set up USB, we set up Wi-Fi, we soldered our power in, got everything else going. But now comes the point where we need to actually get this all in here in a way that's usable and without damaging anything you've done. So out of the entire process, for me, this was the hardest part. You wanted it to still look nice, look stock, but be completely functional as this new RetroPie unit and have everything function the way you like. You have a battery pack in there, take it with you, be able to charge it, get to your SD card and so forth. So this is the part that took me the most. It took me literally hours upon hours to figure out how I wanted to route everything. And between the Pac-Man and the Space Invaders, they're mostly the same. There are a couple of changes I kind of did on the Space Invaders that I wish I'd done in the Pac-Man, but both still came out pretty well. So you can see here, we have our controls and our screens all set, but the whole back is off, and it's like watching The Walking Dead. All the guts are sticking out on the floor. So we have our Raspberry Pi Zero here. We have a little switch we soldered on, which is optional, but you can press this button and it will automatically put your Pi into shutdown mode to power it off. We have our battery pack. We have our power supply. We have our USB. Again, this is optional. If you get a Raspberry Pi W, you'll probably save on this step and save a lot of work I had to do to get that to fit in, and our audio. So you can see here, just trying to figure out where I wanted everything to go took a lot of time. Where was I going to fit the Adafruit power supply? How was I going to get power into it? Where am I going to put the volume control so I can access it? The Pi, I think, was always going to go down here because it sits really nice on these two, and it will give me access to the HDMI port. Initially, the SD card was going to be just left inside as it was, but I said no, I don't want to have to open it to get to it. So I had a couple of options I tried out there. I spent even a lot of time making these little guys, which never worked. I got some of these tiny little micro SD card headers, some wire, and even a little capacitor filter on the voltage. Other people say they got it to work, but it was a little flaky. And I tried this multiple times, different ones, different manufacturers. Never got it to work at all. So I had to find a different solution, which we'll get into in a minute. So here's the back of the Space Invaders. This one probably came out a little bit nicer initially than the Pac-Man. I had to go back to the Pac-Man and make changes. But this was the reset button that was always on the unit, and that's going to be where our reset button is going to go as well. The power switch here had these really tiny little switches, so basically I just had to open it just a little bit thicker, but kept it mostly the same size, so the power switch went in here. This is the battery compartment, so when this door is closed, you don't see anything in here, and that's where I did most of the work. I had to cut out the battery holder here because it took 2 AA batteries, so I cut that all out. And I cut holes for 3 USB ports here, as you can see. And then I cut this section out right here, and if you zoom in, you can see I left a piece of plastic here. It was part of this right here. I left that in. So that just blocks the USB and power because we're not going to be using those two here. We're going to go through the Adafruit for power, and the USB is all up here, so we don't use that jack. And the HDMI is going to be here, but eventually I had to cut this out a little bit. Again, you don't see it because it's still above the door, but I cut this out so you can put an HDMI connector in if you want to, put it on an external TV set. And eventually, initially I left this like this, and if I had left this in here as it was, or if I had gotten this lousy thing to work, which I did not, I would have been fine. But my other solution to end up doing, this had to come much further over, because when you see when I put it in, it was putting pressure on it and it might have broken off apart. So for right now, that's how I did that right there. It's another shot, a little more in focus maybe. And basically I just took the USB unit, and I took the cover it came off of, and I traced out all the holes, put a piece of paper on the back of the plastic. You'll see that probably I think in the next picture. Let's see. Yep. So I just put it back here and marked the holes generally. I made them a little bit smaller, so I had to go back and file it and go back, try it, see if it fits, and go back and file it. That took some time. If you want it to be perfect, you're going to have to take your time, make the hole a little bit smaller, and slowly expand them until you get it to sit in there the way you want. And again, I had to cut this out as well. Everything else here was pretty much fine. The USB actually sat right on here, which is perfect. It had support. I'm going to put the micro SD card in here in one of these locations over here, and the volume control and the audio is going to go over here. So you can see on the center pylon, which is this guy right here, this was the reset hole for the Basic Fun. I had to cut it a little bit just to make the particular micro switch I got to extend out far enough to be pressed. And I made it, and in the Space Invaders, it's pretty much flush. So you really got to get your finger in there so you don't accidentally hit it. The Space Invader, I'm sorry, the Pac-Man, I have extended a little bit more. It's a little bit easier to hit, but I found you don't really hit it that easily. So either one is fine. If you have to press in a little bit harder to make sure it shuts down versus hitting it by accident by being too far out, I'd rather have it a little further on in. So you can see I got everything pretty much in here, the main things. The screen is all set to go, and the wire is routed down. The controls are in. The speaker is in, and the original holder for the speaker is in, but only this screw is holding it. The Raspberry Pi is going to basically press in as far back as it can go, and I glued it in place. So that hot glue is going to hold it in place and keep the other end of the speaker from moving out. And you see it's a little bit at an angle, and that's okay. This will be accessible. This is going to be blocked, and this is hidden. This would have been your power, and this would have been your USB, which you don't need because we're taking both from a different location. So you see here I have the USB header in place, and it kind of fit kind of nice. I have the 3 that I left in place here, here, and here. And the Pac-Man, I had it over a little too far, so I had to actually lop and chop this part off. It wasn't a big deal, it's not being used anyway. But in this one, I kind of centered it better. So I got the 3 ports in here, and then this is a USB sound card, which comes around to where it is inside here. And this will be hot glued in place. You can see all the hot glue. This is not going anywhere. Here are the ports. I drilled a hole here for the PAM volume control, which is in the battery compartment. So set the volume, close the battery door, can't even see it. And I did have to lop off, see if I got my back one picture, if I can still see it. Is in any one of these pictures here. It's not in this right here. I had to cut this off. I tried to eyeball it and put my sound card in here, but I was a little bit off. So I had to file that down. It wasn't too big a deal to take it off. But you can see here's the audio jack. I cut a hole right here with a drill bit. So this is going to push all the way through. And the other end, which was the microphone, I lopped off flat. So it'll be a good spot to hold, be held down with the hot glue. And I filed this down here, which is where I'm going to put my power switch in that particular spot. And again, you're just trying to make sure when you put these in place, the Space Invaders is a bit more of a mess, actually, I think, than the Pac-Man as far as the wiring went. When you start putting all the wires together, if you don't think far enough ahead as to how you're going to route the wires, so they got a little bit of a spider's nest here, so it took a little time to get everything neatly packed, but eventually I did get it that way. And it looks like a real rat's nest in here, again, because I made these wires too long. If you make the wires about 5 inches versus the 10 or 8 inches I made them, there'll be less of this spaghettification mess in here. But again, just take your time, bend it slowly. Don't go harsh, because these wires are very thin and they might break. So just take your time, bend them down, and once they're in place, they're not going to move anyway, so they should be fine. But you can see again, this piece of plastic and this hot glue is holding the Pi in here really nicely, and then over here, so the Pi is going to be fine where it is. All our wires are in place, so that part's okay. Another angle just showing you again how everything had to be pushed down and out of the way, because the back cover, and that back cover comes on, you'll see in the next picture there are these little slots. You can cut them off to give more room. I left them on there for strength. I assumed that were there to hold the control panel, give it a little bit more force on the back and hold that all in place. So I left as much of that alone as I could. And actually I didn't touch them at all, so I did leave them in place. So these ridges right here, you can see them. These kind of hold the back panel on here. So you have to be very careful on routing your wires either between them or got to go around them. But you could lop them off. I mean, it's not, the screws will probably hold it in place, but again, I prefer having as much strength back there as I could get. So I just routed, you can see I routed the wire here, hot glued in place. So this is all out of the way. This is going down under here where it's connecting to the Pi Zero to get power and go into the USB header. So just get everything out of the way. The volume control, you have to be careful with as well. You only got this space to work with in here. Again, as long as you get in that zone, you're fine. There's enough room. But the audio out, I measured it should have fit in here, but I was a little bit off. So because of that, I had to trim it down, but it worked out in my favor, I guess. I just measured it. So now when it closes, this will actually offer more support. So when you're pulling in and pulling out the jack, it won't, the hot glue will hold it, but in this case, it's giving more support to the back. So it actually worked out fine. And again, I put all hot glue in here to hold everything in place. And again, it's just really make sure these wires are kept in a way they're not getting crushed or damaged when you start closing it. And that's going to be the next hard part, just to make sure these are all out of the way. All of this is out of the way of this section here. Otherwise, you may get pinched, break, and then you got to not start over, but you got to try and repair that, and it's going to be a real pain if that's the case. Again, just another shot of the wiring. I take a lot of pictures, sometimes too many of the same thing. But again, the Pac-Man and Space Invaders are identical. So even though you're seeing Space Invaders now and Pac-Man before, other than the color of the case and the decals, they're exactly the same. And here's just another angle. You can see how everything is being held in place. You can see the audio jack right here. And this is actually the audio out. And this was the microphone. So that's not going outside, but it makes a good spot to put some hot glue down to hold that in place. The audio out is here. This LED is very, very bright. I left it on. You can see it more in the Yellow Pac-Man than the Space Invaders because it's darker. If you don't like that light, just hit it with the soldering iron, pop off the LED, or move it somewhere else. You know, maybe you want it somewhere else. And I may actually do that with the with this and the power on the Adafruit, because you can kind of tell if you look in some of the holes, you can kind of see what light's going off of. But I did not actually move the LEDs in a probably a better location. So I might go back and do that on these, or leave these alone. On my next build, I may do that. Here's just another shot showing the hot glue and how all this was set up. Again, if you have the Pi 0W, this whole thing probably won't be needed at all. But you only have one USB port, and that'll probably end up going to your audio. So you may want to still add a small hub, because you're going to want to have the USB audio, and you may need to add something like a keyboard. So you may need to get access to it. Of course, you can also just have your Wi-Fi connected, but you still have to connect it initially. So even with the Pi W with the one USB port, you might have to still get some type of small hub or some way to make sure you can switch between the USB sound and putting in a keyboard of some kind later on. So we're back to the Pac-Man again. They're exactly the same, but you can see here the USB port. You can see here how I cut off the audio part of the jack here. Here is the switch I'm going to use for my reset. And again, it's just laying down your wires. The hard part towards the end is really where I was going to put the Adafruit power unit and the battery. But eventually I did find a spot that worked out pretty well. So here's the Pac-Man one. You can see I did a couple more cuts on this one. This cut over here is going to be for the power. So we have a the reset button, or shutdown button I should say, shutdown button, on off switch. I cut this out by tracing an old cell phone's power jack, and cut this out. This is where the micro USB power supply is going to go in to charge it or run off AC power. I cut this out, and this is going to be the micro SD card. I actually wanted to put this in here, but it had just gotten too tight, and it's fine. I didn't mind it being over here. And I got my 3 USBs. The potentiometer here for the audio, I moved over, and I almost came over too far where it wouldn't fit, but I got lucky. It really just made it. Always want to measure things 5 times and cut once, as they say. And you can see here, this is cut out, and I cut it here a little bit, but this has to go all the way. This has to go all the way down to here. If you cut it all the way down to here, you will be able to still get the mini HDMI connector in, so you can use an external display if you wanted to. But then I kind of cut that a little bit more so I can get the micro SD card to work as well. And just another shot of that same thing. You see, this takes a lot of time. You got to cut these. You have to file it. You can't rush. This will take time. It took me probably a good hour to file these all out the way I wanted them to and get them the exact same shape and nice and tight for my USB and everything else. And you can see back here are the markings of areas I decided needed to cut out to make everything fit. And for the most part, it was done by eye, so I'm not always Mr. Measure. I've actually bought some tools now where I can actually measure it down very close, but with these guys here, we're just doing a little of this and good luck and making some cuts. So this is what I found, and it's just really long. I actually found one now that's only I think it's probably a tenth the size of that length, but this one I had lying around, had it plugged in here, and what I ended up doing was this is basically a micro USB to micro USB extender cable, and when you plug this in to the Pi Zero, this added part here caused me to have to cut this out here more, because this case, this part of the case right here, will put a lot of pressure on this. It actually was not flat, it was actually pushing down on it like that. And it probably would have been okay, you know, it's a PCB, it's thin, it probably could have took the bend, but in time, stress could have cracked it. So I said, you know what, let me just go back. I'm not gonna see it anyway when the battery door's on. I cut it out a little bit more so this was all freed from being pressed down on. And basically I hot glued it in over here. I laid down a strip, put a bead of hot glue, laid another strip down, hot glue, another strip down, hot glue, and I kept doing that to shorten the cable. And that worked out pretty well. It's longer than I needed, way longer than I needed, but that's the only length I had. And by doing these soft loops in here, doesn't put a hard crease and cause a potential crack in the cable, and I was able to get it to the length I needed it to be, and it worked out. So again, just another shot of how the cable is just coming down, a thin bead of hot glue, not much, just a little drop, this, and to hold it in place. And just do your loops back and forth, and be sure though to leave enough at the end so you have some room to work to finally get it in place to plug into your unit. So here's just another angle of it here. It actually fit perfectly between these little ridges in here. It just really, look at that, it fits in there perfectly. So that holds it in place. Here's my switch here for the shutdown. That's going to go in the hole here. My little micro power switch is going to go over here. My power supply is coming in through here, going into the Adafruit up here. So it's going to come out, and it's going to this micro USB cable. I just cut it from an old cell phone. Got it from a dollar store. I got a bunch of them at the dollar store. Just so I have these little micro USB jacks to use. The Pi Zero is in place. So now it's just get the sound card put in place, glue these guys in place, find a spot for my battery and the Adafruit, which ends up being up here, and finish folding this cable. And just another shot here. Why take one picture when you could take two, right? Or in this case, three. But you can see now I got the USB sound in place, and I like how this one came out more. I end up redoing it, and I think it just fits in really, really nice how it came in here and goes into the USB hub. Power switch is in place. The volume controllers here. Again, on the Space Invaders, I have it over a little more this way. I had to angle it down, and I think that it would have given me more room to work with, to put in, say, the micro SD slot instead of here. I could have put it here, but it was just getting too tight, and I was fine putting it there, I guess. And just another shot going down. So I did end up having room here, but what I was worried about was there was nothing to really secure it to. Here I had these two pillars to hold everything in place. I probably could have leaned it up against here, but then I worried about maybe a USB device blocking it. Again, I could have probably pulled them out and put them back in. It wouldn't have been a big deal. But this way, I don't have to ever take them out and worry about it. And again, just trying to get everything nice and tight, folding the wires. I ended up having, you can see here, I kind of brought them around this way just to avoid, so that by coming here, everything's going to come around this side, and just avoid all this stuff here for a potential pinch or getting them crushed or vented some way. And man, I really like taking a picture of this cable. I was pretty proud of it. So here's another shot of the cable. And just another shot. Hot glue is your friend. Don't worry about using too much. You know, if you do put something and you hot glue it and you say, oh man, I don't like that, I got to take it out, just heat it with, if you have a rework station or even a hairdryer long enough, we'll heat this up and it'll loosen, and you can take it off and peel off the hot glue and redo it. So don't worry about it if you're using too much. But once you know where it's going to go, put the hot glue on there and make sure nothing will ever come off ever again. It'll keep it really good in place. You can see the USB sounds in good, the volume control is good, everything else here is looking great. Now it does get starting hard to work, because when you start getting these things on there and start moving it, you worry about these thin cables breaking, and I was getting really nervous because I was so many times taking it apart, putting it together, trying to figure out how it's going to route, however you want to say it, the cables. I was actually worried about them breaking, but thankfully none of them did. They did survive. And you can see here, you want to leave enough of this cable so you can slide it here and get it in. There's plenty of room to get it in. But again, that back cover, if I didn't cut more out, this here was getting pressed down to the point where I was worried about it snapping at some point. But that's really it now. Now, once this cable's in place, is just finding a spot to mount my power unit. And another shot of the cable. You can never have too many shots of a really cool cable glue job, I suppose. Now we're getting ready to fold it up. So what I ended up doing was I put some of the non-conductive heat tape down here, and again I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now, but I'll have it down in the comments. So the battery just fit in here, a couple drops of hot glue keeping it in place, and then I simply use some double-sided tape to hold the Adafruit to the battery. And then my external power jack is being fed into here, comes out into my battery, on-off switch comes out here, and then the power feed to the Pi and everything else comes out of it. So now the only thing we have to do now is just get them to close without causing anything here to be bent. And you can see the cable is going to be twisted. You have to be careful. You see this guy right here, there's one over here. You have to be careful when you're closing it, it doesn't get pinched. You don't want to pinch like the very last pin, and then all of a sudden your SD card doesn't work, and now you got to take that whole part out. So just take your time putting it in place. If it feels like it's being forced, go back and take a look. Don't just go, I'll get it in and close it. It may work for a while, but it may break a cable or something like that. It should close nice, not feel a lot of pressure in closing it up. So it's another shot here. Again, make sure all your cables are out of the way. Can't stress that enough. And we're ready to go. So that's it. So you can see here, when it's open, you can see all the controls over here. And you can see the volume control on the shutdown button is a little more exposed here on the Pac-Man than the Space Invaders. You have to press in here, and this got a little more. But to be honest, I think I like that fine, because you can just reach around the back and hit it without accidentally hitting it. It's not something that's so easy, you're going to smack it and shut it down. But that worked out better. And the power switch also, I made the hole. I had to sand down a little bit to get the power switch. It's such a small switch. This one I can get with my nail. This one I need like a paper clip or a thumbtack to turn on and off. So that's a little bit of a pain. But again, these were prototypes, so I kind of figured out how it was going to turn out as I went through it. And you can see my power jack and my micro SD card. Micro SD card is in place. Power. With the door closed, you only see the micro SD card and the power jack and your headphone jack. And you can see the headphone jack here. And then when you close, so when you open it up, you can see your volume control, your USB over here, and you can see, I know it's a little blurry, but you have full access to your HDMI, so you can put in an external television. But your other two are blocked, which is what you want. You're not going to accidentally plug something into the USB here, since you have the USB hub going along here, and you won't hit the power because the power is actually now being fed up top there. So that's it. And so with that, we're going to end part 2 of the Basic Fun Glen Retro Show Mini-Cades. The next installment will be the software side, how to set up the controls, the screen, and the rest of the programming to complete the project. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and again get a basic understanding of what's involved in converting these Basic Fun Mini-Cades into really awesome Raspberry Pi retro gaming systems. So stay tuned for the next episode, and again, thanks for watching, and remember everyone, game on. Sit, Blue Blue, sit. Good dog.